I have to tell you that I had a difficult time trying to come up with the perfect word about life for our worship service this morning. And I finally feel and figured out why. Because throughout our worship time this morning, we have heard so many different words about lives. And so I would ask you that at this time to join me in a moment of prayer. Would you please pray with me? May the words of my mouth and the meditations that come from each and all of our hearts be acceptable to you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. I want to begin this morning by sharing a story. And this is a story that brought new hope and new light into the darkness of my life. Now, when we view the word hope, we have a choice. And we can view hope in one of two ways. Hope can be viewed as hearing other people's experiences, or we can view hope as helping to open people's eyes. As I share this story with you, I invite you to listen carefully, because I want you to reflect upon if hope can help the church to hear other people's experiences, or if hope can help to open people's eyes. Some of you, this story is familiar to you. Others will be hearing it for the very first time. I endured a lot of hardships growing up in the church, especially in Sunday school. I would often find myself wrestling with the notion if God was a member of my team or the opposition. Prior to learning that I had been diagnosed with a hidden brain-based different ability, I found myself taking an authoritative approach to life. During Sunday school, I would often observe and overhear my peers having sidebar conversations with one another. It was particularly distracting and at times upsetting because the parent who had volunteered their time to teach Sunday school would not step in and comment that it may be distracting to those who may want to take something away from the day's lesson. As a result, I found myself becoming upset and storming out of the youth room. And as a result, this became a repetitive pattern. And I remember being called into the pastor's office. And the pastor asked me to refrain from participating in any youth group activity until I could get my anger under control. How many of you believe that this story can help the church to hear other people's experiences? Okay. How many people believe that this story can help open people's eyes? This is not a trick. This is truth. The truth is that when we actively listen and engage in hearing other people's experiences, we as the church can provide an all-access welcome to all of God's differently abled and beloved children. Have you always felt welcome at the church? Do you recall a time in your life when you did not feel welcome at church? And for not feeling welcome, do these memories still haunt you today? As a result of these traumatizing experiences, did you begin to feel and become distant from both God and the church? At Shadow Rock United Church of Christ, we are driven by our core values of inclusion, justice, and spirituality. This morning, I want to further examine our core value of inclusion. And the Google Dictionary defines the word inclusion as the action or state of being included with a group or structure. More often than not, that you will hear these words as our service of worship begins every Sunday morning. No matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. Here at Shadow Rock, when we say all are welcome, as Lois said as she shared our time of celebration, we mean it. We will find you and welcome you at our shared table of Jesus. When we say all are welcome, we mean it. We also acknowledge that it is a work in progress. Inclusion speaks to the universal truth that everyone has a place at the table of life and love. Our core value of inclusion is interwoven with our core values. There is not justice without inclusion of all of God's beloved people. Prior to learning and accepting the call to serve the conference as the lay minister for disability education, advocacy, and awareness, I guess I need to shorten my title. I was asked to represent the conference at the 2018 United Church of Christ Widening the Welcome National Gathering in Niagara Falls, New York. One of the workshops that I attended was presented by a mother and her 25-year-old differently abled daughter. Notice here that I did not say the word disability or disabled. When you refer to another human being as a person with a disability or being disabled, it not only labels them, but it puts them into a category that no one wants to be a part of. Have you ever put a label upon yourself or someone else? If you have put a label on yourself, or especially if you put a label on someone else, how did it make you feel? But more importantly, did the thought ever cross your mind how labeling another human being could not only damage them, but it could potentially change who they are as a person for the rest of their lives? As a young woman shared her story about how she is in a time of discernment as she is struggling to find her place in the church. As we continue to move forward in our time of discernment, where we as a congregation will determine our next wedge blade ministry, which allows us to live on the cutting edge of faith and life, I would ask that you consider the following. What makes a church welcoming for members and friends who are differently able? Again, what makes a church welcoming for members and friends who are differently able? What turns our differently abled members and friends away from God and the church? What turns our differently abled members and friends away from God and the church? How do we as a congregation begin to have intellectual, intentional conversations about what is working and what is working well and what is working not so well for our differently abled members and friends? And when I say this, I want us to think about our drive of inclusion and how we include our differently abled members and friends in the pews on Sunday morning, or we save a place for them at our shared table. More importantly, it is about finding a place where they can be the church beyond the walls of this place. We are called to be the church beyond the walls of this place. There are 4 stages where each church can cooperatively work together to decide where they're at when it comes to offering an all-access welcome. And they can work together to decide how they can move from the current stage where they are to the next stage, so that they can make sure that they can provide a welcoming, safe, loving, and inclusive place for all people. So stage one, do we ignore the differently abled members and friends? Do we throw our differently abled members and friends a pity party? Believe me, I've thrown myself plenty of pity parties. And you've seen where I was, and goodness knows where I am now. Do we want to help the differently abled members and friends, but we just don't know how? Keep in mind that people who are challenged by mental health conditions, some are very vocal and public about it. Others, it is a very personal and private matter. So this is a struggle not just for me, because I'm the kind of person, as you all know, who wants to help all people. But when it comes to people dealing with private and personal matters, as a church, we are called to wait. And sometimes waiting to see how the Spirit will not only move us, but will move them, we have to be intentional about that. Do we make an effort to build friendships and relationships with our differently abled members and friends, not only inside of this church, but outside of the church as well? These 4 stages only begin to scratch the surface of what it means for the church to be a welcoming, safe, inclusive, and loving place for all of God's differently able and beloved children. I have experienced and faced a lot of adversity in my life, which as a result has instilled a lot of fear. When we observe the word fear and we use it as an acronym, we yet again discover that the word fear has 2 meanings. As a people of faith, we have a choice when we are facing any kind of fear. You can either forget everything and run, and believe me, there were many times I wanted to do that. But the interesting thing is, God didn't turn back on me. And for some reason, I always kept looking behind me to make sure that God was still there. Or we could face everything and rise. I had a choice to make. And as I said, I thought I was going to forget everything and run. I realized that if I forgot everything and ran, that was the easy way out. Instead, I chose to face everything and rise. What is God's plan for you? What is God's plan for us? In God's purpose and plans for you, for me, and for us as a community of faith, we must ask ourselves a very important question. Are we ready, willing, and able to answer God's call that will allow us to provide an all-access welcome to all of God's differently able and beloved children? I invite us to find a way to move them out of the pews so that they may finally find a seat at our notion of a shared table for all of them. And all of God's people say, Amen. Amen.